Hello! Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another adventure in history. I'm your host, Shane McInnes, and I've run out of pithy catch lines. Guy with things to say. Hey, Steph Anomaly, how's it going? Hey, Fid, how's everybody? Welcome, welcome. I fixed the white balance issue on my camera. Check it. I don't look like I'm slightly blue anymore. I don't know if that's a visual representation or if that is some sort of larger metaphor for my life. I'm not quite so blue anymore. Apparently, hey, big crowds. Apparently what happened when I went to set up my camera to do the model building streams that I've been doing, it reset all of my my presets, and it basically changed all of my camera settings back to default. No, I'm not blue, dabba-dee, You think the sunburn just reached my lens? That's also quite possible. I am no longer peeling. I'm sure everybody is excited about that. And wants to know all about my skin condition. I'm not currently sunburned, but I was pretty badly sunburned not too long ago. I got sunburned in the shade, for those of you that forgot or weren't here to learn. I was literally sitting in the shade. Head and shoulders, man, head and shoulders. I've never really had a problem with my scalp. Except for when I get sunburned in my scalp, which happens because I keep my hair short. Yeah, sunburns are horrible, man. And I had like the itch from Hades for a couple of days. It's that itch that just like, it's so bad and it's so itchy that you almost want to like rip your skin off. I don't know if any of you all have ever experienced that level of sunburn itch, but let me tell you, that would be an effective torture method if you are a person that believes in some version of the afterlife where the bad people go to get tortured. That's some horrible stuff. It was bad. I went to sleep one day at 5 o'clock in the afternoon because I just could not handle the itch anymore. It's almost as bad as chickenpox itch. See, here's the crazy thing. Like, I had chickenpox when I was a kid, but I had such a mild case that it didn't even register that I had chickenpox. I couldn't tell you when it happened. I couldn't tell you how many times I had, how many chickenpox I had. The only thing that I know for a fact is that I have, in the past, had shingles. And you can't have shingles unless you've had chickenpox. So I figured out that I had, at one point, had chickenpox because I caught shingles, which was horrible. And that was the same sort of itch. You had a major case? I am sorry to hear that. Yeah, I know, it's crazy. And part of the issue was that when I was a little kid, man, I was so self-destructive that I constantly had, like, I would constantly mess myself up. So I might have had chickenpox at the same time that I got into an ant bed and had ant bites everywhere, and nobody recognized that it was chickenpox plus ant bites. I was a wild child, and I was a bad kid, such a bad kid. But so how is everybody else? How are you all? How has your week? How's your week been going? How's your day been going? How are you? How are you all feeling? Anything new? Anything exciting? Any good news? Anybody want to share good news? That would be great. Good news seems to be in a short supply. Perhaps it's because the loud news is just being yelled much louder, or the bad news is being yelled much louder than the good news. But no good news, but no bad news. So hey. No bad news is good news, right? It's always good news when I get a notification. Oh, big crowds. That's very kind of you to say, my friend. I'm glad you get to make it. Welcome. That's good. You've given me a reasonable excuse to not watch the debate. I promised that I did not plan on competing with the debate. I have I've made a decision, and I made this decision actually all the way back over the summer, that I was going to do as much as I could to kind of insulate myself from politics and the news. Uh, I tend to get wound up about stuff, and it was not doing me any good. We have a puppy visitor. Hello, puppy. What would you like? Do you want to come up here? No, you just want to cuddle? Okay. You refuse to watch it, it'll just make your blood boil. Yeah, see, that's sort of the thing where I am. Like, I don't need additional stress. And nothing that either of the candidates would say tonight is going to make me change my mind about how I'm going to vote. And the only thing that it could do is make my blood pressure go up. So I'm just going to disconnect from that because I don't need that kind of negativity. I prefer to spend time with my friends and talk about Rome, and talk about what happens to tyrants. So welcome everybody. I will open this discussion tonight with an admission that I'm pretty sure that I've made before, but I want to just sort of lay all this out kind of clearly. Of all of ancient history, I have spent the most time in my life and my academic career studying Rome. And I have done my absolute best to not drag this out, right? So, sort of behind the scenes on Adventures in History, one of the things that I try to do, and this is, I'll preface this preface with a preface, that I don't do any of this negatively. This is not meant to be in any way a reflection of my community. Because I love you all. I really do. You all are bright spots in my life. I really enjoy hanging out and talking to you guys and girls and people and dudes. You dudes. And so when I prep these lessons, I sort of in my head try to keep them at about a 200 college level. So what we would call a sophomore level. And I do that for a few reasons. Number one, I am a giant honkin' nerd. And I like to get down into the fine kind of nitpicky details, pick apart which actual verb is in the Latin kind of thing. And that's just not what everybody wants to do, right? And not everybody gets super excited about that kind of stuff. Also, I want to make sure that anybody that drops in can just pick up and enjoy themselves. You know, you don't have to have any prior knowledge walking into one of these streams. You don't have to have seen any of the previous episodes. You don't have to have ever read a book about any of these people or know very much about them. I try to make this stuff approachable. And I say all of that to let you know that taking the love that I have for Rome and keeping it on that level is something that is difficult for me to do. Because I want to talk about everything. I want to talk about all of the people. I want to go year by year through Rome. I want to talk about this guy's family and how they married that family and how that caused them to do all of this stuff. I want to do all the minutia, and I'm not going to do it. And I say that in a bit of a general statement to say, if you have questions about this stuff, let me know. Because this is one of the worlds of history where I can really chase rabbits forever. and we could talk about lots of nitty-gritty detail stuff. So, yeah. Chill and approachable. That's why you keep coming back. Oh, yeah. So we're going to keep it chill and we're going to keep it approachable. But this is almost like me being the dog that has the treat, like, balanced on its nose. And I'm going to be nice, and I'm going to be still, and I'm not going to eat the treat. But if somebody says eat the treat, man, I'm going to eat that treat. I'll eat that treat up. Anyway, so let's talk about Rome. Alrighty. So right off the bat, to put this in the context of the wider world, we have already talked a very, very small bit about the Romans, but only in relationship to the Etruscans. We spent some time back 10 episodes ago talking about the Etruscan people who are up here in northern Italy when we were talking about the 7th century BC. We'll talk about some Etruscan stuff tonight a lot more as well. But around Rome, you have a lot of different groups of people. And one of the things about Rome that makes them sort of unique is that they're going to have this series of confrontations. And every time they have this confrontation, they're going to change a little bit, but they're also going to kind of like turtle into themselves a little bit, if that makes any sense. So they're going to adopt some new things, but they're also going to become much more stubborn about some things. And the conflicts that they have with the Etruscans and the other Italian people, and then later the Greeks, and then the Carthaginians, and then the larger scale Greeks, these are all going to be wars and conflicts that Rome is going to come out on top, but it's not always pretty. So first off, where do we start? Well, Rome. Rome is a city of 7 hills. And if we go, it sits right about here. And if we ask the Romans, where does Rome come from? They're going to give us a couple of different stories. And it really depends on when you ask them where Rome comes from. Because there are a couple of different versions of the story. A lot of Rome's wars were ultimately their fault. I would argue absolutely against that. But that's... I'm not going to eat the treat. So at various times, the story of where Rome comes from changes a little bit. And there are 2 major ones, and they end up actually getting kind of mushed together as we kind of go through history. Why is that dropped down to 24 font? I don't want 24 font. Give me 48. Give me the 48. The first one is Romulus and Remus. Romulus and Remus, and I think people know kind of Romulus and Remus, but let me tell you the story. And to tell you the story, I will put on the adventure hat, because I'm going to show you a statue. And it's a fun statue that is supposed to be the original statue. So what we see here is a statue of 2 little babies, and they are being cared for by a she-wolf. She-Wolf, one of the lesser-known Marvel superheroes. Not actually a Marvel superhero, by the way. That was just a bad joke. So, Romulus and Remus, boom. 2 little baby boys that were abandoned in the forest by their parents. They were raised by this wolf. And this particular statue supposedly, finger quote supposedly, was at one time the official statue that was in Rome. Now, this particular statue is in the modern day city of Siena. And the story goes that some barbarians sacked Rome and were carrying this statue off. And the Sienese managed to retake the statue, but they didn't give it back. They just kept it. Squirrel Girl has no arch nemesis. Oh, she doesn't lose survivors. Anyway, so if you wanted to go to the main Piazza del Campo in Siena, you can see this statue. And I've seen it, and I took that picture in 2017 when my wife and I and my in-laws went to Rome in Italy. I've been to Rome several times now. It's an interesting city. We might speak later on that. But, so what's up with these two kids? Well, Romulus and Remus, they're abandoned, they're raised by wolves, and then they get rescued by this farmer, and they become great warriors. They end up becoming very powerful leaders. They're going to decide to found this city, and they each sort of have camps on these different hills, the Aventine and the Palatine, if you're particular. And these hills are going to be kind of just camps up on the top of the hill. And Romulus and Remus are going to have some fairly sizable arguments about how to actually run the city and how things should be done. And Romulus wants to build this sacred boundary around his city. And this is actually a really important part of the story that a lot of people miss. Romulus wants to build this thing called a pomerium, which is a fancy word for sacred boundary, right? So Romulus wants to build this around the city, and Remus is kind of being a jerk, and Romulus wants to make this rule where you don't bring weapons into his city or across his pomerium or into his sacred boundary, right? So you don't violate his borders by bringing armed soldiers into his city. Well, then Remus gets a little hacked off because Romulus is telling him what to do, and Remus attacks, and they have this big fight, and Romulus ends up killing Remus. And this kind of starts off a few things about Rome that tell us a lot about these people. First off, they believe that they are descended from people raised by wolves, right? So this tells us that they believe that they are fierce people, that they are tenacious, that they will hunt you down like a pack, right? Also, this tells us that Rome is not afraid of getting rid of people that break their religious laws. And one thing I can say about Rome that is going to be true every time we talk about Rome, the rules of religion are super important. The Romans are incredibly superstitious. And right off the bat, we get this in this foundation story. Also, it's brother killing brother. So the Romans aren't afraid of shedding their own blood if they feel like they're in the right. So there's one of the myths. But there's also this myth of AiH. And this is a little bit of a later myth that the Romans sort of start bandying about once they come into contact with the Greeks. And if you read the book called the Aeneid, which is written by a guy named Virgil, much later in time from where we're going to be talking about, under the rule of Caesar Augustus, this story kind of gets promoted a lot more. And the idea here is that Aeneas, who was a Greek soldier descended from the gods who had fought in the Trojan War, gets lost on the way home. Dido and Aeneas, there we are. So Aeneas gets lost on the way home, and he and his men find their way over to the Italian peninsula, and they find this region of 7 hills, and they receive some signs from the gods, and this is where they decide to found this great city that would be Rome. And then Romulus and Remus are kind of like kids. The whole raised by wolves thing doesn't really carry over very well. But at certain points, these two different myths do kind of jumble up, and Romulus and Remus kind of become descendants of Aeneas. But this idea that the Romans are descended from these great warriors of the past, everybody wants to be from a cool place, right? But there's no evidence that the Latin people ethnically have any relation to anybody that would have been over in the Greek mainland. So what does archaeology tell us? Hey, Lagger. Archaeology tells us that there were people living at this location in Rome all the way back at about 1200 BC. These would have been Neolithic, like kind of camping settlements. There are going to be some early villages around the 4000s, 5000s mark. But the problem with Rome is that because we have all of this constant habitation, the layers of the archaeology are really muddled. And it's very hard to tell because everything is built on top of each other and 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 on top of each other for like forever, right? Indo-European migration in the Italian peninsula. More or less. A little bit of Celtic thrown in there for some fun. So, Rome itself has been roughly habitated for a long time. That's what I'm trying to get at. Now, there is a specific day that the Romans said was the day of foundation, and this was April 21st of 753. This is BC, of course. So the Romans said this was the day that their city was founded, and this was a really important festival day. It was a really important day of religious and kind of reflection and partying and having a good time, but this is like the birthday of their city. And all the way back in their histories, and even in the ancient histories, we're talking about histories that were written by people in Rome way in the BC period. Everybody kind of recognizes this as the day. And there is some evidence that supports a particularly organized group of people in the middle 8th century living on the hills of Rome. Now, did they have some great big city with walls and stone buildings? And no. What we're talking about here are some wooden huts up on stilts with a wooden palisade around them, because Rome, for a long time, was literally a swamp. It's on the banks of the Tiber River. We can zoom in on it. Let's go look at Rome. Now, of course, the modern city is much larger. But you can see the Tiber. There he is. So, for most of the Roman period of time, all of this region over here... Oh, where am I? Like, all of this stuff in between these hills would have been swamp. And there would have been little camps or kind of villages on the tops of these hills, but we're not talking about something fancy in the 800 BC range. It's just not going to be there, right? Wait a minute, that's our wedding anniversary, 421. Did you plan that? No. He's a confused stoner. So, Rome itself gets founded, and right off the bat, they are going to be ruled by a series of kings. Only half the friends we invited show up. Maybe so. Anyway, so Rome is initially going to be ruled by 7 kings. And when we start talking about these kings, one of the things that we have to understand is that some of this stuff is either fully mythological or quasi-mythological, right? So when we talk about these early kings, a lot of this is based on Roman tradition. So the first king, of course, is Romulus, which is where we get Rome from. Now, Romulus, was he a real person? This is a question we really don't know. There is evidence that, there were people living on these hills. Sure, there absolutely was. There's no doubt. Could one of their chieftains have been named Romulus? Very much possible. Could one of these people have unified the tribes on the tops of the hills to make one larger settlement? Absolutely possible. Does that mean Romulus was the first king of Rome? We don't know, right? Yes, this is Remus's brother. If he was real, what if Remus had won? Would Rome be Reme? Quite possibly. Maybe that's why they actually fought, because Romulus was like, we're going to call the city Rome. And Remus was like, no, we're going to call the city Reme. And he's like, that's a horrible name for a city. There's a joke there, but I'm not going to go get it because it would very much not be a PG-related joke. Somebody remind me when I'm not in Adventures in History mode. Anyway, so Romulus is the first king, and he is given credit with establishing most of what we would call the big Roman institutions. First off, he establishes the Senate. The Roman Senate is going to be one of the most important legislative bodies in Rome. Now, it's also fair to note that the Senate itself did not always have all of the legislative power, because there are also these things called the tribes. I put trivia there because the Latin word for it is comitia, trivia. And everybody in the city of Rome was part of one of these tribes, and this was a voting block. And we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty, but the Senate and the tribes were the legal lawmaking bodies of Rome, and they were the ones that were going to decide who got to be king. So they actually elected the king. The king did not pass the title down through heredity. The king was chosen by the Senate and people of Rome. So if you've ever seen, I'm typing too much stuff here, but if you've ever seen SPQR as a reference to Rome, this is actually a phrase in Latin. It's Senatus Populus Quaevum Ranus, which stands for the Senate and people of Rome. So here's the Senate, here's the people, and that's how they made laws. He is the Senate. Oh, I've missed some stuff. He later went into the paper business. There we go. The founder of Dunder Mifflin. I am the Senate. Latin is a pretty sounding language based on how we think it was pronounced, but when it comes to an actual useful language, it's like trying to build a car with only 5 tools. It's just not a very utile language. It's clunky, and I don't really like trying to read it because you never really know what the words mean. You have to kind of guess at context. Latin is a very small language linguistically. It doesn't have a lot of words in it. And words can mean lots of different things depending on how you use them, whether or not they're receiving action or giving action, whether or not it is the direct object or something. You know all these grammatical terms. Latin is clunky, and while I am familiar with it and can read it and can speak a little bit, it's not the best language ever. But it does sound pretty. Latin has few words. Oh yeah, Latin is very few words. I think it's only about maybe 50 to 55% of the words that Greek has. It's a very small language. Anyway, so Romulus establishes the Senate. We get some tribes to vote. We make the Senate and people of Rome. He's also going to establish the army. The Roman army is an institution. It is part of who they are. The Romans are going to be a people that fight. And it's just the way that they are. The Romans are a bit unique in the ancient world in that their army are professional soldiers. If you want to be a soldier, you sign up to be a soldier and Rome pays you. That's very unique and very different in Rome than it is everywhere else in the world at the time. Nobody else in the world has a professional standing army. But Rome does. Well, I mean, not at this exact time, but the army that Romulus establishes is going to go on to be a standing army. Latin was smaller and had way fewer tenses and cases than Greek. Was the case of English? Yes. There we go. So, Romulus gets old and dies, and this new guy shows up. Wait. Do I have pictures? I can't remember what pictures I loaded. Oh, I forgot a good story. Well, maybe not a good story, but I forgot a story. So, initially, and this is going to tell you a little bit about Rome too, either when Aeneas and his men showed up, or when Romulus founded the city with his bunch of guys, there weren't lots of ladies in Rome, and they needed good wives. So I'm going to put the adventure hat back on here, and I'm going to show you another statue. Statues, woo! Gotta love the statues, right? Oh, I should actually switch over to the statue instead of just looking at it myself. I've seen it before. Dun 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 dun. This is a statue that's currently in, it's on public view in the city of Florence. And this is a statue that is called The Rape of the Sabine Women. It's by a guy named Gian Bologna, who's in the background about to beat somebody to death with a stick, though. The Riddler? I don't know, Taylor Doodle. Who is? Anyway, so what we see here is this big strapping guy carrying away this... Ooh, I should probably put that right there, because that's probably breaking Twitch TOS. And now that I'm thinking about it, there's probably a lot of things breaking Twitch TOS here. Maybe I should be more careful about the pictures that I'm taking. Oh, dad dang it, Twitch. Okay, well, we're just going to show it anyway. You would think that statues are fine, but I would bet that Twitch gets bent out of shape about a lot of stuff. Anyway, so here's the story. I just wanted to show this really cool statue, by the way. Oh, the guy in the back with... Oh, okay. You mean this guy down here in the corner. That's actually a statue of Hercules fighting a centaur. And he is about to beat that guy to death with a stick. Yeah. I have a picture of that, too. I've shared that in the past, but I don't... I may be able to throw it on the Discord later if people are interested in seeing the statue of Hercules beating the junk. Yes, Chiron, there we go. I didn't know how many people knew that one. Way to go, Vern. Breaking out the good old mythology. Okay. So, the story goes like this. Rome didn't have ladies, but there are some people that live up in the mountains that are just a little bit outside of Rome. Right over here. And they're called the Sabines. It's Sabines. I have a thing right here where I can actually type words and you can see them. It's amazing. Sabines. So the Roman men decide we're going to go take those Sabine women. And so they storm the Sabine city and they abduct all these women and they drag them back to Rome. And this is actually where a fun Western culture little tidbit comes from. If you have ever heard of a guy carrying his wife over the threshold of the home the first time that they enter it, that refers to this. When the Romans kidnapped a whole bunch of Sabine women and forced them to become their wives. Western culture, right? The story also goes that the Sabines got all angry and put their army together and went to go beat the junk out of the Romans and save their women. And when they got there, the women were like, oh, we don't want to go back with you all. The Romans are much better than you all. Wink, wink. Nudge, nudge. So tells you a little bit more about the Roman people. They're very cocky. We'll just leave it at that. Latins and the Sabines spoke two different languages. Yep. Rape of the Sabine Rant, Star Wars classic romance. Romance. Romance actually comes from the word Roman. Go figure. Anyway, so Romulus gets old and dies, and we end up with a new king. Again, these kings are elected by the Senate, and his name is Numa Pompilius. How did you never realize that? Romancy. Yeah, there you are. That's where it comes from. Numa Pompilius. This guy is a pretty important guy to the Roman religion for a few big reasons. Number one, Rome already had religion, and it had lots of different gods. But Numa Pompilius is supposed to be the guy that decided that Jupiter was the biggest and greatest. Jupiter. He supposedly built the first temple to Jupiter in the Roman Forum, and the story goes that he was actually offered the position of king and went, I don't know if I should be king. So they asked him, like, no, we really want you to be king. And so they kind of like said, no, you really should reconsider. So he's like, well, how about this? Why don't we get some augurs, these people that read signs, and why don't we get them around and we'll do a big sacrifice, and if Jupiter thinks that I should be king, I'll be king. And so Jupiter blesses the reign of Numa Pompilius, and therefore Numa Pompilius says Jupiter is clearly the biggest and the best. And there is actually some of the temple left. Well, it's a later version of the temple that has been rebuilt, and it's currently in the Roman Forum, and it looks like this guy. This was the front of the Temple of Jupiter in the Roman Forum. And of course today, there's lots of stuff built around it, and you can go see it if you want to. It's a pretty cool place. I'm once again wearing this, by the way. So, pretty cool stuff. Built in a knockoff style of the Etruscan temples of the time. Yeah, it's pretty big. Now, again, this was not the original temple. The original temple was made out of wood and then later replaced by stone. The one that you're looking at there was a couple centuries younger, but in the same spot. Jupiter Optimus Maximus. Jupiter, greatest and biggest. Optimus Maximus, not Optimus Prime. Anyway, another thing. Numa Pompilius is credited with creating the first high priest position. And the high priest in Rome is called Pontifex Maximus. And what's neat about this word here, Pontifex, Pontifex Maximus, it just means great bridge. A pontiff was a bridge, and this is a metaphor, right? The bridge between humans and gods. So Pontifex Maximus, high priest. There we go. This is established under Numa Pompilius and voted on by the tribes. Another thing, also religious, that Numa Pompilius does, is that he establishes the cult of the Vestal Virgins. Now, the Vestal Virgins are a really important female priesthood in Rome. There were set numbers of Vestal Virgins. They took vows of celibacy. They protected certain sacred relics. And they were really important when it came to sort of getting the blessings of Vesta. And I have a picture of the Temple of Vesta. Well, what's left of the Temple of Vesta. It's actually in much worse shape. There are only a few columns left of it. It was originally circular, most likely. But this is what it looks like. Also there in the... what am I trying to say here? Also in the forum. I learned recently Jupiter is Eupater, Skyfather. There we go. Not to be confused with the Temple of Vespa. You would be ironically surprised, perhaps, Vern, to know that if you drive anywhere in Rome, the city today, there are entire fleets of Vespas. And the people that drive Vespas in Rome have literally no fear. So much so that you might think that they actually sacrifice to the god of Vespa before getting on a Vespa and driving around, and only do so with the blessings of the god, knowing that they're going to be killed in some horrible traffic accident. But Rome is just swarming with Vespas and little motorcycles, and these people will drive anywhere that is a flat surface, and some places that aren't. Anyway, so there's Numa Pompilius. He's a pretty important guy when it comes to establishing Roman religious stuff. Gotta love this guy. So he dies, as what happens to us all when we get old, and we get a new king, Tullus Hostilius. So he gets the name Hostilius because he's a bit hostile. And during this period of time, Rome had sort of solidified itself in its position, and it decided that it needed to start expanding. And it had grown out from its city walls and built some nice farmland around itself and was growing in population. And there was a particular city just to their outskirts called Alba Longa. And Alba Longa was kind of like their arch nemesis to begin with. And it was another city that had been established well before. It was larger. They had sort of beaten up on Rome a little bit. Well, Tullus Hostilius is going to be the guy that takes out the Alba Longa establishment. These guys get wiped out. This is one of the first big victories that Rome ever really claims. And we're also getting to the point here with Tullus Hostilius that we think we might actually have some archaeological evidence that supports this guy being real. Big on bridges and messengers? Right. Did a lot of Rome's antiquities get destroyed by the Visigothic and Vandal sack of Rome? Probably. But the Visigoths were mostly after money. And the Vandals were mostly out to send... well, I'll probably say more of the Vandals than the Visigoths. But that's like 410 and 455 AD. So that's like 1,200 years later. We'll get there later. Rome decided it needs to expand. Couldn't this literally mean the entirety of its existence? Well, yes, but also no. Alba Longa kind of started it by beating up some Roman people out on the borders of Roman territory because they didn't like the idea that Rome was expanding. There weren't a lot of people immediately around the vicinity of Rome, so there was actually some room to grow. And the people from Alba Longa kind of started it. He started it! Why did the Vandals have such a rage against culture and civilization? They actually didn't. A lot of stuff about the Vandals has been blown way out of proportion. The word vandalize didn't actually take place, didn't start get... Blee, 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 blee. The word vandalize did not become regularly used in language until the Renaissance. The Vandals did sack Rome, and it was pretty bad, and it did cause a lot of trouble. But, I mean, the Vandals ran an entire kingdom for over 100 years in Africa. The reason they get a bad name is because they were Arian Christians, and they didn't really like the good old-fashioned Catholic Christians, and they tried to force people to convert to Arianism, and that didn't go over so great. And then Justinian wiped them out and wrote a whole bunch of bad propaganda about them, so... Plays the window, restart chime. Ba-da-da-da. Right, exactly. Anyway, Tullius Hostilius, there we go. What about Ancus Marcius? Ancus Marcius, ooh, this guy. Let's see. This guy is going to be the real fighter. He's going to start fighting the Sabines. He's also going to start conquering the people that are just called the Latins, the people that spoke the same language as the Romans that were more or less right around Rome. And he is going to be the first guy that recognizes that Rome needs a port. They need a way to get out to the sea, because the Tiber is one thing, but having a connection to the actual sea, well, that's another thing. So right out here, there's a new city that gets put together as a port called Ostia. And Ancus Marcius decides that Rome needs a port city to trade with. We need to do this trade stuff. We need to have boats. They don't have good boats. They don't do boats very well at all. Rome is not going to do boats very well for about the next 450 years. A bit of an odd question, but do you know when Rome had around 1 million people in it, was it like cities today, or was it 1 million people spread out in separate towns, etc.? Fair question. So most of those people would have been in or around the city itself. The people that lived outside of the city, kind of in the little villas, the big fancy houses, those people would have probably also had dwellings inside the city. So at any given point, there might not be 1 million people inside the actual city walls. But when it came time to vote, you had to go to Rome, right? There were designated places to vote. And then everybody would have come back in and stayed at their house in the city and done their stuff. Like a metropolitan area, similar to that. They would have been within a day's or maybe a half a day's ride from the city. But at certain points of time, especially later when we get to the sort of larger, more quasi-imperial Rome under the late Republic, there would have been 1 million people in the city. Like, in the city. Especially by the time we get to... Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm not going to eat the treat. We'll get there. We'll get there. Eventually, there are going to be 1 million people in the city. So, Ancus Marcius, we're going to make a port. We're going to expand. We're going to beat up some Latins. We're going to beat up some Sabines. It's like Osgiliath. It took them 4 centuries to figure out boats. Yeah, that's the thing. They didn't live on the sea. If you don't live on the sea, you really only need little things that paddle up and down the river, right? We're not going to build big battle boats to paddle up and down the river on. You really only need stuff like barges, and even then you're probably going to move just up and down the coastline a little bit on stuff like barges. Rome doesn't really get a good fleet until the First Punic War, which is in the 240s. Rome invents the suburbs. No, the suburbs had been around for a while. Over time, they absorbed the Latins and recognized them as Roman citizens. Yeah, we're working on that. That's what we're talking about. And I need to make some time up because I am already rambling too much. So let's cover these next few kings fast-like. All right, and I'll just put all of them up here at one time. Well, I guess I'll put 2 of them up here at one time because this guy's name is friggin' humongous. Okay. By the time we get to this dude, Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, the Etruscans had really started to take an interest in Rome. And Priscus here was an Etruscan. But he did get elected. He had left the Etruscan world and he had moved to Rome and had taken up citizenship there and had become a decent guy and was doing good things. But it's important to know that the Etruscans are moving towards Rome, and Rome is moving towards the Etruscans. Romanization, less enemies if everybody is Roman. Yeah. Unless you fight yourself, which they do. Anyway, let's look at a picture. One of the things that Lucius Tarquinius Priscus does is build this thing. This thing is the Cloaca Maxima. Woo! Big ol' exit thing. It's a sewer. What does it do? Well, it drains the Roman Forum. and it gets rid of all of that really bad swampy stuff. So, swamp be gone. That's this guy. Alright, Servius Tullius. Who's this dude? Well, he fights a bunch of people. He is going to create a new voting body called the Centuries, which is going to basically start off a whole big problem when it comes to class warfare. Under Servius Tullius, the poor people of Rome, aka the plebeians, are going to get the right to vote. The opposite is the patricians, by the way. This starts off a conflict that lasts for about the next 200 years between the people that are upper class and the people that are lower class. Plebeians, lower class. Patricians, upper class. And there's going to be a new vote system called the census, where you get to tell how much you are worth, and they get to decide whether or not you're upper class or lower class. That happens under this guy. This is a big problem because the poor people want power, and they want to be able to participate in Roman politics, and the patricians don't want them to. Yep, there we go. Servius Tullius starts a big war. Well, he doesn't actually start a big war. He gets involved with a big war with the Etruscans. And he is actually going to get assassinated by the last king, who is Lucius. Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, a.k.a. this guy. Kind of a jerk. Tullius gets assassinated. This guy takes over. This guy's a bad king. By the way, Servius Tullius, also an Etruscan. Lucas Tarquinius Superbus, also an Etruscan. Etruscans are kind of running Rome. Kind of looks like a Chad. He kind of is a Chad. Superbus kills a whole bunch of senators that don't support his rule. They don't like the way that he's running things, and he kills them. And it was sort of his job to also then name new senators to fill the positions that because there was a set number of senators. But he killed a whole bunch of them, and then he didn't name replacements. So that basically gave his supporters like a lot more voting power. He also really stops listening to the advisors. And the Roman kings sort of had this council of advisors, these close group of senators and these elder statesmen of Rome that gave them good advice, and that it had become customary to go talk to these old guys, especially when it came with dealing with this thing called imperium. And this is going to be a problem in Rome forever. Imperium. What does imperium mean? It literally means a life and death power. You have the power to kill somebody. And the kings had imperium. And in court cases where you were going to dispense the death penalty, you were supposed to go talk to the advisors. It's just what people did. Well, Superbus is like, I'm friggin' king. I ain't got to talk to nobody. You're dead. Well, that makes people upset. Also, he starts deciding that the Roman treasury is his personal piggy bank, and he wants to build all sorts of stuff. I'm going to build big old honking walls. I'm going to go fight everybody. Doesn't go over so great. So what ends up happening? Well, his son gets him in trouble. So here's what happens. His son is also a jerk. I am the law. I am the law. Right? His son is going to fall in love with this very pretty Roman girl and basically demand that she become his wife. And this woman's name is Lucretia. Lots of jerks in Roman history. Yeah, there's lots of jerks in Roman history. There's just lots of jerks in history. I mean, we can just say that in general, right? So he falls in love with this woman, Lucretia, and he says, you've got to be my wife. And she's like, no. And he's like, okay, I'll kill you and your whole family if you don't. And she's like, okay, well, this is a horrible deal. Fine, whatever. Not Genova, Lucretia. Oh, you mean like that? The actual, yeah, okay, yes. In that case, Lucretia. Vincent's girlfriend. Anyway, they say romance is dead. So Lucretia kind of blackmailed into this scenario, gives up her body to the prince, and then feels so bad about it she kills herself. And her father finds out, and this is like bad news. So he goes to the king, Superbus, and he's like, are you going to discipline your son? Because he's a horrible little jerk. And Superbus is like, no, he's a prince. He'll be king one day. He can do whatever he wants to. And this is like, okay, time to get rid of the king. And so Lucretia's dad calls together all of the old Roman men and the citizens and the Senate, and he goes, let's talk about Rex. Rex, by the way, Latin word for king, which is also kind of a bad pun because of the Lucretia scenario, but it's what I got. So we got to talk about this king issue. And the Roman people are like, yeah, this guy's turning into a jerk. We don't like this fact that he's kind of running things by himself. We want to get rid of him. And they go, what are we going to do? Well, kick him out. So the people of Rome rebel against Superbus, Imperius Rex. There we go. Not Namor. But they kick him out. But then who runs Rome? And this is important because in 509 BC, Rome sets up the Republic. The Republic. And immediately they have to go to war with Superbus, who runs back to the Etruscans and says, give me armies. And they're like, weren't you just fighting against us? And he's like, well, I mean, yeah, but we could go kill Romans. And they're like, okay, sounds good. So the Romans have to turn around and fight a war against their last king, which drags out for a while. But when you get rid of the king, somebody has to be in charge, right? Somebody has to hold Imperium. Somebody has to make the life and death decisions. And the idea here is that we're not going to have one guy. The idea of... Wait, that was you? I love that that's becoming a thing. Anyway, so somebody has to make these decisions. Somebody has to lead. And Rome comes up with the consul. Oh, the consul. Okay, so here's what a consul is. And this is really important because this is a big deal for the next 500 years of Roman history. Consuls are, brackets, list, people that get elected. They get elected by the tribes, and they serve for 1-year terms. So you are going to get elected. There are always 2 consuls. And they get elected for 1-year terms. And when you serve your year, you've got to sit out for a certain number of years. And the number of years changes over time. Sometimes it's longer, sometimes it's shorter. But you've got to sit out usually about 4 or 5 years before you can run for consul again. And during the time that you are consul, you are co-consul with this other guy. You know, there's a consul, there are 2 of them. Each consul has veto power over the other one. Veto is a Latin word. It means I forbid. So if one of the consuls goes off the handle and is like, we should go kill everybody, the other consul can go, no, you need to chill out. Also, they're going to alternate months of holding Imperium. So when they get elected, one of them has Imperium for the first month, and then the next one has Imperium for the second month. So even during the year, you aren't completely in control all the time. And this is all set up, except for the numerous times when people get elected multiple terms of office. That's much later. Much later. And that's after they start screwing around with the system. And it's also what causes the system to collapse. Much later. Where was I? Oh, and this is one of the sticking points. To be a consul for the first couple hundred years, you got to be a patrician. Now, the plebeians get to vote, but you got to be a patrician. Plebeians do not have the right to be consul. Consuls are important. They are the top positions in Rome. Important. Because what happens next? Well, they fight off this war against Superbus. They fight off the Etruscans. And then they kind of have this moment where they come back home and they're all like, hey, everything's great now. We aren't at war. We've closed the doors to the Temple of Janus. Gosh, now I'm eating the treat. There's a big Temple of Janus, and it had doors. And when Rome was at war, the doors were open. And when Rome was not at war, the doors were closed. Anyway, so they get back and they start trying to go about doing things, but it turns out that these wars that they were having had kind of bankrupted people. And it had fallen especially hard on, wait for it, the poor. That's right, the poor, who had gone off to fight the wars that were decided on by the consuls. And in order to keep from losing their land, were having to take out really big loans, of course, from the from the patricians, because the poor people don't have very much money. The plebeians were having to borrow money from the patricians. And it turns out that, well, this is sort of a problem, because the plebeians are going to go off and fight in the wars, and they're going to get back home, and they're saddled with all of this crazy debt, and then they start losing everything. And there's this really great moment. Well, it's not really a great moment. It's kind of a sad moment. But there's this story of this Roman honored veteran who shows up in the forum, and he is completely destitute, and he's in rags, and he's got a big shaggy hair and big beard, and he had lost everything. And he tells his story to the people in the forum, and he's like, look, I fought for Rome. I fought for the people of Rome. I fought for everybody, and I came home and I've lost everything. And it's because I'm up to my eyeballs in debt. I had to mortgage out everything. I then lost my family to sickness. I've got nothing left. This is really bad. And the rest of the plebeians kind of hear this, and they're like, yeah, that seems to be happening to a lot of people. This is a bad move. We need to do something about this debt issue. So they actually approach the patricians, and they go, hey, you guys need to pass some sort of law that would work on some debt relief, or at least, some reduction thing maybe, or something where you can't kick us out of our homes or something like that. And the patricians are like, you borrowed the money, you must pay the money back. The plebeians are like, okay, fine. And so in the next time that a war shows up in 493, the patricians go, okay, everybody show up for the war. And the plebeians go, no, not going to do it. And this is called the secession of the plebs. They leave the city and they walk about 3 miles away from Rome, and they sit down on this thing called the Sacred Mountain, and they refuse to go to war. Why should they? What you gonna do? So the patricians have a bit of a problem because they wanted to go to war, but they don't have an army now. What you gonna do? Well, but you have to. Right. No, they don't. They quit. We can't fight. We're rich. Anyway, so what ends up happening is they have to negotiate. The patricians send out negotiators. They say, okay, what can we do? What can we do to make you all happy? And they go, well, how about not being jerks? And they're like, okay, well, what else can we do? Probably had bone spurs. Burn! Okay. Anyway. Okay. The entire population, bone spurs, very bad, hurts really bad. Apparently still able to play college basketball, though. Anyway, that's enough of that. There is a new position the consuls sit down with the plebeians and they come up with a new elected position. And this position is called Tribune of the Plebs. And the idea here is that there are going to be a certain number of officials elected that are going to be the voice of the common people inside the government. And these tribunes are going to have veto power, and these tribunes are going to have sacrosanct powers, which basically means that if you kill them, you get killed too. Or if you harm them, you get harmed too. They're sacrosanct. They're not supposed to be touched. And this is the compromise. Okay, you give us some voice in the government. We're going to be nice. We'll go back and fight your wars. This is what we were after in the first place. And one of the things that was happening is that when you got in massive amounts of debt, you could get basically worked to death. You know, you could get sold into debt slavery, and these tribunes could go, no, you're not going to do that. They had power to veto death penalties, which is something that was really needed because at that point, the plebeians had basically no recourse if they were condemned to death because they couldn't really take patricians to court. That'll change later too. Anyway, so, okay, we get the guys back on our side. Everything's going great. We're going to go fight these Sabines now. They're going to fight a series of wars for about 25 years against the Sabines. The Etruscans are going to get involved in this on the fringe because the Etruscans don't like the fact that the Romans are growing. So some of these Sabine cities had actually been dominated by Etruscans. But those old Sabines, well, guess what? Now they're going to be good old-fashioned Romans. But this class problem is not going away. And in 450, Rome decides that it needs to write down its laws. Which makes sense, right? We need to write down and codify our laws. And the Senate chooses 10 people. These are going to be called the Decemviri. And their job is to take brief and intermittent power to organize Roman law. And while they're doing this, they're going to be able to change the laws and enact new laws. So in order to fix the system, basically, we're going to give you power to break it and then rebuild it. But you're only going to have a set amount of time. And at the end of that time, you're supposed to give the power back up and you don't get Imperium anymore. But it turns out that when you give these 10 people all of that power, they actually do codify the law. And they produce these things called the 12 tables, which are the basis of Roman law for the next forever. But it turns out that when you give 10 people virtually unlimited power to run the entire city and the surrounding areas, they don't want to give that power up. And the Decemviri start doing crazy stuff, like we can just kill whomever we want to. If we want to kill people, we can kill people because we have Imperium. So guess what? There is the second secession of the plebs. They leave the city. And they go, we're not coming back until the Senate deals with those Decemviri jerks. You guys got to get rid of those tyrants that you made. And they have to basically threaten the Decemviri's lives. Like, look, guys, you just got to give up the power. You're becoming kind of king-like. And in Rome, if you insulted somebody by calling them a king, that was a pretty big insult. Because, again, these kings are jerks. And it's around this time period that the Romans start thinking about making laws about political ambition. And Rome eventually makes a crime called ambitio. And you could get tried under a law for ambition. If it looked like you were trying to seize too much power, you could literally get thrown in jail. Or you could have your position stripped from you, or you could get what they like to really do. You could get exiled. If you're trying to collect too much power, you can get kicked out of Rome. Yeah. They don't like people looking like they're trying to be kings. Oh, wow, you'd never be in danger of that. Me either. I don't want to be a flippin' king. That would be horrible for everybody, including me. So the Decemviri start looking too ambitious, they end up having to get rid of power, but this doesn't really solve the base issue. The base issue is that there is this giant legal disparity between the patricians and the plebeians. Seriously, if you want to understand English better, learn Latin and Greek. There we go. It's like our language comes from that or something. You think we should bring that one back? I'd be okay with ambitio. I'd be fine with that law. So in 445, part of this new 12 tables law thing is shoring up these established differences between rich people and poor people. And part of the law had drawn this really heavy line between patricians and plebeians. And about 5 years after these 12 tables get made, some of the patricians actually start pushing for an even more sort of dividing line. And they come up with this idea that patricians and plebeians shouldn't be able to marry each other. So, like, if you were a plebeian and you could arrange for your son or daughter to marry a patrician, that would be really big for your family. But this new law is like, we shouldn't really let them do that. That's bad. Just this class mix thing is just bad. So the plebeians leave the city again. And at this point, the patricians have to give up a little bit more power. First off, they have to drop this ridiculous law that plebeians and patricians can't get married. So that goes out of the way. But there is a new issue with this constant fighting, because Rome is still constantly fighting. And it turns out that the tribunes of the plebs only have power inside the city of Rome. Yeah. So tribunes are only going to be inside Rome. But where are the armies? Armies aren't inside the city. Rome has a sacred pomerium around it. Your army can't come inside the city. Also, we're fighting the Etruscans way over there. So what happens if one of these patrician military commanders gets our plebeians way over there and decides that he wants to kill all of them? The tribune can't go save them. Who's the voice of the people in the military? Well, it turns out that you need a voice of the people in the military, so what do they make? Military tribunes. And these people go with the military, and they oversee patrician military commands. And if you're trying to punish plebeians unfairly, or if you're trying to kill them for trumped up charges, guess what? The military tribune's right there and can veto your garbage. There we go. So they come back for the third time. And this constant fighting is really a thing. Like, Rome is constantly fighting. And there's one big city that is just to their north called Veii. And it is the biggest Etruscan city. It is the richest Etruscan city. And of all of the Etruscan cities that had been causing them trouble, the rulers of this place were the worst. And they had been constantly causing trouble, and the Romans decide, we really need to go get this guy. We really need to go wipe these people out, because they're just constantly poking at us. They're not leaving us alone. They're trying to influence our politics. They're trying to get our people to rebel against us. Time to go get them. And this Roman leader, who is one of the most important early Roman figures, and nobody knows who this guy is. Anybody ever heard of Camillus? I'm sorry, Camillus. Anybody ever heard of him? Camillus? Anybody? Anybody? Probably not. Because he doesn't get covered in most Roman history classes. Camillus is a super important Roman leader. And he gets tasked with leading the army against Veii. And he gets elected to an important and sort of rare position called dictator. Because Veii had become such a serious and immediate threat, Rome had to take drastic action. And there is this position called dictator inside Rome. And you got elected dictator, and you held power for 1 year. And in that 1 year, You were the sole holder of Imperium. At the end of the year, you were supposed to show back up to the city of Rome, turn that power back over, and then, if Rome so desired, they would give it back to you in a vote. But you had to give it up and then take it back. Well, VAI is a big issue. It's right there. It's causing problems. They're going to attack immediately. They need a quick response. So they go, Camillus, you're our guy. You are now dictator. Go get these guys. And he does. He goes up. He wipes out VAI. This is going to drastically diminish the power of the Etruscans. It's going to open up most of northern Italy to Roman expansion, especially up towards this region right here. This nice big region that's flat is the valley of the Po River. It's just P-O. And once they get past VAI, they can get up to here where there is a lot of really good farmland. But when Camillus comes back home and he gives up his political power, he gets to participate in a ceremony called a triumph, where he gets to be paraded through the city of Rome and everybody throws great big parties in his name. But his political opponents try to get rid of him. They say, he's getting too ambitious, look at him, kick him out. And Camillus gets exiled. No good deed, right? No good deed. He's not gone, though. He's just exiled. So he gets kicked out of Rome. And then bad stuff happens. Rome is not living in a bubble. Up here, and on both sides of these Alps mountains, live a group of people called the Gauls. And at this time, the Gauls are led by a guy named Brennus. And he hears about these Romans and their big old britches. And Brennus goes, why don't we go take out these Romans? Because it sounds like they're going to be a potential problem for us hanging around the Alps here. We don't need new people up here. If somebody's going to kill the Etruscans, it's going to be us. I do so want to be famous. Ogre X Tank 509. Man, I want to be famous so badly. How do I do that? Please tell me how I do that. I can? Can I really? That sounds amazing. Anyway, I could be famous. Not just Twitch famous, actual famous. I can be on the nightly news. Anyway, so up here are the Gauls. Brennus goes, if the Etruscans are out of the way, we need to expand this way, and we need to go see what's down here. Oh, there are these Romans. We should kill these Romans. And the Gauls attack. And the Romans try to stop them at this battle. It's called the Battle of Allia River. The Roman army gets waxed. It's really bad. And in 390 BC, the Gauls, under Brennus, invade the city, breaking the Pomerium, and sack Rome. And this is a really bad moment for the Romans. This is the first time that they had really faced this level of invasion. Usually they had been able to keep people out of Rome. This is a bad one. Brennus and his Gauls kind of run rampant over the Roman city for quite some time. And it's only the bravery of a certain group of people, including Camillus, that managed to push the Gauls out of the city. And they get pushed kind of out of the city limits, and the Senate's like, we need someone to help us. And Camillus is like, I'm your Huckleberry. And so they give him dictator powers again. They kind of cancel his exile. They're like, we're sorry we kicked you out. Yes, those guys are jerks. Please, goodness gracious, save our hiney. And Camillus does. He runs out the Gauls. He manages to reestablish security in the city of Rome. And not only does he run them out, he pushes them up back to the Alps. But the sacred ring, warriors can't go in there. Yeah, except for the Gauls who don't really care about your sacred boundary. They will tell you what you can do with your sacred boundary. But this means more warfare. And this means more problems. Because guess what? The plebeians are tired of constantly fighting and taking all the brunt of the thing without having a voice for themselves. They don't get to decide whether or not to go to war. This sounds very Athenian. Yeah, it could be common, right? Please take me back. No, we don't want to fight. But we're getting our butts kicked. Okay, please take Hymen back. Yeah. You kick people out that are good, and when things go bad, you realize that you need them. Then you gotta, beg them to come back. And sometimes they might go over to the Spartans like Alcibiades did. Wait, that was you? Anyway. Rome is expanding. The voice of the people. Vox Populi. Right. Rome is expanding. And as they're expanding, they're adding to the public land. Right? There is this concept of the public field. That's Latin is agro publicus. And this was up for grabs. Basically, anybody that was a Roman citizen could apply for free land as Rome expanded. But guess who was getting all the land? Anybody want to guess who was getting all the land? If you guessed the patricians, you're correct. And the plebeians are sick of doing all the fighting and not getting any of the land. So what do? They secede again. This is the fifth one, by the way. Nope, this is the fourth. Nope. Fourth one. So the plebeians want a consul. They want plebeians to be able to run for consul because consuls are going to be able to orchestrate the law. Shane would know as a pleb himself. Dude, I am a total plebe. I am plebe as plebe can be. My family was removed from the patrician list about 3 generations ago, and I have been plebe through and through. I have no problem with that. I'm not even an equestrian. I'm just a plebe. Anyway, so guess who decides to work out this deal? It's Camillus. Camillus is like, okay, we're going to work out a deal. And here's the deal. We're going to not just say that plebeians can run for consul. We're going to guarantee that one of the 2 consuls every year is a plebeian. Guaranteed, in the books, sign it up. That sounds like a great plan. Great plan. Everybody's greatest plan ever, huge deal, best deal in history ever. But that doesn't mean that the poor people are going to get any of the land. And they don't want to give up the land to the poor people, because if you give poor people the ability to make money, it makes them not poor. And then they might actually qualify for patrician status at the next census. And there are kind of like set floating requirements. There's a kind of a bar where you have to get over this bar based on everybody else. And if you're broke compared to, some of these patricians were like barely hanging on. So if a plebeian got real rich, she could knock a patrician out of that status. And ain't nobody want that. Ain't nobody got time for that. But this public field is a big deal, and it's becoming a bigger deal because the patricians have realized that as long as Rome continues to expand, there's always going to be more land to get. And as long as they get control over it and they get to take dibs on it, well, guess what? They're never going to go broke because they're constantly going to be adding to their land. So the patricians have kind of a corner on the market, and the plebeians get real mad with this. And the concession is, what if we let some plebeians run for some religious offices? right? Why don't we let patricians be flamens? Flamens were like big priests. And the patricians are like, this is a great compromise. And the plebeians are like, well, that's great, but I don't know. What about maybe give us some friggin' land? Well, that doesn't work. And so what the plebeians actually try to do is start voting on stuff. There's this thing called the plebeian council. And they start trying to get laws passed using kind of the power of voting blocks that would basically limit the amount of land that a patrician could hold. And the patricians are like, oh, heck no, we ain't going to do that garbage. That's never going to happen. So they leave again. This is in 287. This is the last secession of the plebs. And it's going to be the one that kind of makes a lot of stuff stick. This Ager Publicus thing had been a real big problem. There had been more wars with the Latins and the Samnites. In 338, the Latins had been finally conquered. In 290, the Samnites had been finally conquered. And at that point, Rome controlled basically... got to click over here. Basically, this whole chunk of Italy. All of it except for like the toe and the heel of the boot down here. So kind of like all of this. Which is way bigger than it started, right? So they had all this land. The Ager Publicus becomes an issue. They try to keep passing land reform laws. And they can't get anything through. So they go, we quit. We just fought six decades of war. And this debt problem had been a real issue again, because with constant fighting, in order to keep people up and running, they had to take out these big loans to keep their families afloat. They get back home from the war. The veterans that are plebeians have no more money. Everything of theirs gets taken, and the patricians are using this as a very active kind of policing mechanism to keep the plebeians down, right? If they know that they can run these people into crazy amounts of debt and then confiscate what all they have, you can basically keep the poor people poor forever. And the plebeians had just basically had enough. So in 287, they go out and they secede for the 5th time. And at this point, they really are only going to accept one outcome. And the guy that gets chosen to sort of negotiate this is a dude named Hortensius. Which is the greatest name ever, right? I'm sure you're going to go name your firstborn son Hortensius. So he goes, what do you want? And they go, we want to be able to pass laws by ourselves that deal with all Roman citizens. Your next cat will be named Hortensius. That's great. So this is not going to go over great. The patricians are sweating bullets about this. First off, let's remind ourselves that the Roman war doesn't work without the plebeians. The patricians don't get more land without the plebeians going to fight for it. So the only way to keep the mechanism going is to have the plebeians on their side. And now that they have literally quit everything, you have to deal with them. And they're very obstinate on this point, that they are not going back to the sort of standard operating procedure. We're not going to go back into this scenario where we're just getting pushed around forever. So Hortensius passes something called the Lex Hortensia, which is the Hortensian law, or the law of Hortensius. And this it's not going to be an easy pass, but the Lex Hortensia says the plebeian council votes are binding for all Roman citizens. Apostrophe, or like asterisk. But they had to be ratified by the Senate. And this is not the final way of fixing this problem. This is not some sort of ultimate perpetual fix. But it really puts kind of a magnifying glass on the Senate. And it gives the Senate some accountability, because if the people, the plebeian councils, pass laws and the Senate just continues to veto them, the Senate is not really then standing for the people of Rome, because the people would have been speaking and the Senate then has to defy the people. So if Rome is the Senate and people of Rome, doesn't the Senate has to do what's best for the people? And these problems are not done by a long stretch, but the Lex Hortensia is going to make it very clear that the plebeian people inside Rome are not just lapdogs that can be pushed around. They have political authority, they have the ability to pass laws, and if the Senate continues to muck around with them, well, you know, they're going to be held accountable. You mean we actually have to work? Right. Hortensia is Sophie's middle child in Peep Show. Oh, yeah. Right. Well, this is where it comes from. Anyway, I love Peep Show, by the way. Such a great show. So this kind of puts a nice rounded point, a rounded end on the discussion. Now, I could have kept going, but there are going to be some developments going on in other places, especially in this 300 period of time, the 300s BC, that we need to talk about, because Rome's next big enemies are going to be Greeks. And Greece has to go through some changes, especially around the 330s to 320s BC. And they're going to fall in love with a Macedonian guy named Alexander. Well, they're not actually going to completely fall in love with him. He has to kill a whole bunch of them and then force the rest of them to join his army. But once they all line up behind him, well, he does a little bit of an important thing. 300 BC, where the Romans stopped the Greeks from invading by using the Trojan horse on the shores of Marathon. Exactly. That's exactly right. Man, I could do almost a whole stream on how badly that how bad it is. Like, if we had to pick apart how bad each one of those little parts was. That was great though, Goose. That's great. So next Thursday is Alexander the Great and Macedonians and the destruction of Thebai and all that fun stuff. The fall of the Persians and the rise of all sorts of people in his wake. Macadamia nuts? Yes. Small white things that are much better than they should be. All right, so that wraps it up for me. I was very happy that I kept myself in line. There were some times there where I could have chased some rabbits, but I kept myself under control. Pretty pleased about that. If anybody has any questions about any of this stuff, by all means, let me know. If anybody wants to spend some points that are down below your chat, let me know. I do have one kind of note of, I guess, discussion. There had been talk on my part about doing a viewer request stream on Saturday. It has come to my attention that I had actually agreed to help a friend on Saturday, and I utterly forgot about it, apparently. And anyway, I've got to go honor a debt to a friend, so I will not be able to do History of Cheese on Saturday. I know that I have been putting that off now for almost a month, and I will be getting to it sooner rather than later. I have it completed and it's ready to go, but things don't always work out the way that I want them to. And if I told somebody I was going to help them, I need to go help them. If you want to give us a history of knowledge of Rome, go for it. Oh man, like a single random history fact from Rome. Okay, so here's a great one. There are these books called the Sibylline Oracles. And at one point in history, there was this... somebody had broken to the temple of Sibyl and stolen the 9 books of the Sibylline Oracles. And they went to the king of Rome and said, I will sell you these books for this astronomically high price. And the king was like, you're full of crap. There's no way I'm going to spend all that money on it. And so then they went and burned 3 of the books. And these Sibylline Oracle books were supposed to be like the things that you could use to interpret all things of the future. And so then they came back to the king and they're like, we got 6 of these books. Here's the same price. You want to buy these? And he's like, why? No, I'm not going to. That's still astronomically high. What are you doing? They're like, okay, fine. So they went and burned 3 more of them. And then they came back the last time and he's like, just give me the friggin' books. These are like the most sacred things ever. And so he bought these 3 books and gave them back to the Temple of Sibyl for like an astronomically high amount of money. So there's a random little history fact about Rome. Fun little myth there. I know so many of those little weird things. What was money like at this point? They had coins. They were making mostly silver and copper coins. They had some gold coins, but gold wasn't really that big of a deal. And their coins weren't really that great either. By the time we get to the later part of the Republic, like, so the coin period stuff starts back in the kings of Rome. By the time we get to like the 280s, Rome has got a pretty standard money system. Didn't they pay people with salt? Yeah, that's part of it. That's mostly soldiers that were in the field, and that was mostly because they knew that soldiers had the ability to trade. Just about every big major Roman military camp had a trading camp outside the walls of it, where they would trade with the local people. It's really the only way that these Roman military camps could continue to exist. So if they didn't have specie, like gold or silver coins to give them, they could give them salt, because salt was a valuable trade good, and then you could go out into the trading camp and trade with the locals for food or whatever you needed. They were put on loan to the library in Alexandria. Oh, sadness. Yeah. So, fun little Roman history facts. But anyway, my initial statement was meant to say that we will not be having history of cheese on Saturday. Do you know if there was any kind of credit system, or did you pretty much always have to fork over the coins? Oh, no. There was a loan system, which is one of the big problems that existed with the differences between patrician and plebeians, because these patricians had all the money and they would loan it to the plebeians, and usually charge really, really high rates of interest, because you could there wasn't a central banking system. You could loan money to people at whatever rate you wanted. And the patricians were sort of holding the plebeians over the barrel by saying, well, you have to take these loans or you're going to lose everything, and we're going to charge you really high amounts of interest, so you got to do that too. And it's just, man, it's a big mess. What about the statue of Hercules and Chiron? When they took out the loans, they're literally giving them coins, right? Not always. The big patricians, like the big families, could write letters of credit, which would basically establish a line of credit for you. I mean, there were coins traded hands eventually. I mean, they didn't have a purely demonetized system. Yeah, you could draw against your patron's credit if you so desired. Let me see if I can find this photo of the Hercules guy fighting. I know I had the picture. I just need to go find it. Italy 2017. Piazza della Signoria. There we go. All right, I'm going to throw it in the Discord. And for those of you that don't know, we have a Discord here. And once Discord loads... Oh, did I break Discord? No. Did I? Oh, don't crash. Okay, there we go. In the photos channel. So I did, on Tuesday, I told a story about me falling over off of an ancient monument. I did put a picture of me on the monument up there on Tuesday night. I don't know how many people saw me standing on top of the monument. I also designated the little bush that I tried to use to get down. Okay, so there's the picture of Hercules fighting Chiron. It's mostly pseudo-historical memes. There are a fair number of historical memes that get shared on the Discord, yes. Oh, good times, though. You might try to save up points for a history of credit. I could probably make that work. It'd be a bit of a challenge, but I'd take it on. Okay. Oh, there was a puppy request. Let me call the puppy. Here she goes. Oh, and she has the chicken. Hello, Kaylee. There's the puppy. Where are you going? Where are you going? Hello. Were you asleep? Were you asleep on the couch? Where are you going? Come and see me. Come here. What are you doing? She likes to pace. Where are you going? Come here. Okay, well, I guess that's the puppy. She does not like to be awoken rapidly from a nap. It takes her a little while to kind of reboot her puppy operating system. Those weren't whines. Those were what we have called chicken noises. Because when she's holding the chicken, you can go... have you seen the Reddit post with the most people agreeing that the Romans could have defeated the armies of Mordor? I disagree. Mordor had ring wraiths and catapults and warlocks, and no, that wouldn't have worked. Indebted students secession. Oh wow, yeah, the secession of the students. Yeah, magic beats Rome, and they had oily fonts, and Rome hates fighting elephants. At one point, later on, once they start fighting the Carthaginians, Rome passes a law that says nobody that fights can use elephants, and they pass this law for basically everybody on Earth. Like, if you fight us, you can't use elephants. Because that makes perfect sense, right? I joke and say that elephants are like the nuclear weapons of the ancient world. So there we go. Big as a house, gray as a mouse. I don't know how many people get that reference, but there we go. All right, ladies and gents. Anybody else want to ask anything or do anything or say anything? I know where we're going to head. We're going to head over to Cryomera's stream. Cryomera is a big friend of the channel, has done a lot to help me get myself going, has been very, very kind, and she normally does not stream on Thursday. She normally streams on Friday, so we don't get to raid her. But we're going to go raid her tonight because I think Cryomera's channel is awesome. So that's what we're going to go do. But before we do that, anybody else want to say anything, do anything, redeem some points, ask some questions? Anything like that? Anybody? Anybody? I wouldn't mind a pointer as to a good source book on early Roman history. I have one in my possession, and I can't remember the specific author's name. So, Mitchie, let me get to my office tomorrow, and I will... I'll tell you what you can do. If you will either send me a whisper on Twitch or send me a message on Discord and just ping me on and say like Roman History Sourcebook. I have it up on my shelf. I can't remember the author's last name. I'm horrible with remembering names, but it's a really good book. I will send it to you as soon as I can. Probably tomorrow. Saving it up for something Grecian. I don't know if I can do hair streams, Vern. Grecian number 5. Anyway. Alright. So, we're going to go a rating. I'm going to hit this button. And I will see everybody next Thursday. And we will talk about Alexander the Great. And it's going to be a good time. So, until then, my friends, thank you very much. So I'm going to hit this raid button. And I'm going to switch over to the outro screen. And we're going to go raid Cryomera. As always, our battle cry during the raid is adventure. And if you have the adventure hat emote, if you throw as many of those in there as possible, that would be much appreciated. I will see everybody next time. Thank you all so much for hanging out and for putting up with my absolute nerdiness of Roman stuff. So, see you all next time.